Okay. I'd like to call this special meeting of the council for November 30th, 2023 to order. I'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Alrighty then, do I hear adoption agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moving second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Nays, passed unanimously. Thank you. Draft ordinance amending the municipal code by adding chapter 12.60 residential parking zones. I guess Lori, you're in charge of this one.
I would be glad to talk to it. So we talked about this proposal quite a long time ago. And the concept was to at least provide a process for citizens to petition for residential parking zones, especially in light of the future sound transit parking and light rail situation, but also the lakefront property. There are some zones that could be impacted. And if, depending on how we go, 60 or 70% of the residents of a particular area wish to petition and set up a program like this, they can under this proposal. The other thing I'll mention is, because it's not automatic, it has to come forward as a petition, is that there's not one size fits all. It can be for a few hours on the weekend. It could be for peak rush hours, Monday through Friday. The neighborhood gets to kind of decide what it is they're petitioning about. There is a review process, and the city public works director is in charge of it. At the point where there was a program, I would anticipate that we would try to make it pay at least most of its own costs through the annual permit fee. So there is an annual permit requirement. We had a discussion, I think on one or two meetings previously. Kim, our city attorney, picked it up and did a very good review. I think in light of our previous comments, there are some questions in the margins that I thought it was appropriate to still leave to the council for discussion. For example, should the petition requirement be 60% or 70% of the neighbors before you can go forward with that? But overall, I think it's ready for a mature discussion, and then a discussion today about how best to proceed.
Okay. Any questions for Lori at this? Discussion about it. Yes.
Thank you. Laurie, thank you very much for all the good work on this. The one question I have, because I'm always paying attention to staff workload, is why is it the public works director that would do this? Why might it not be our community development director, for example?
That was one of the earlier questions, and we had, some cities have public works director, some have the planning director or community development director. Some actually have the city administrator, which seems like that person probably then delegates it to someone else. So I am completely open to what our staff team and our mayor think would be most appropriate. So that is a very good issue, and one that there might be a way to punt it if we wish to, by saying, you know, appropriate city director or something like that, or designated city director, designated by the city administrator or whatever. But so I think it's an excellent question. When we last discussed it, we kind of were, I think, landing a little more on the public works director, but especially since we have this new position that's going to have enhanced responsibilities, that might make a lot of sense. I would support that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Bodie. This is excellent work. And I just a couple of thoughts. One, I really like the fact that there's an opportunity for the residents to kind of help define the time frame, et cetera, maybe seasonally as well, because there's times that things don't really get used. And I was just on the topic of the percentage. I think it is important for us to make sure that we coordinate that, find us some sort of standard that's consistent with say the neighborhood streets program. So if it's petition based, whether it's traffic calming or parking or neighborhood streets, I think we as a body need to figure out what the percentage looks like and make sure it's sort of ubiquitous across the group for consistency.
I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense, because otherwise you're in the situation where you're saying, why is it that what happens on one street and neighborhood is different from the other? So,
Yeah.
I mean, we could split the baby and say 65%. So, again, I think that is exactly the kind of topic for the council to provide some direction on. Yes, I agree it should be consistent, but what is the percentage
Yeah, I
that's
don't know either.
appropriate? Yeah.
Thank you.
Tracy, Larry, any questions or any comments? Yes.
Sure. So on the percentage, because we've had this discussion with the Healthy Streets
Yes.
Ordinance. And I think we landed on 70 because there's already something in the code. I think it has to do with petitioning for speed limits or something along those lines, where it has a threshold of 70% for the traffic working group already in place. So we decided to have the Healthy Streets match that.
And that seems to be a good place to go. What do other council members think? If this were 70%, would that be something that they would support? I personally would, so.
Yeah.
I see some nods
I would
around the
too.
table. So, so that's a good resolution of that issue. And it sounds like then from there forward, if we have similar provisions, we'll use the same percentage.
Just on point, I think that probably if the community is coming to us and asking for something, we're probably not going to see a close margin here.
Right.
It's
That's
probably
true.
pretty unanimous or close to that. Particularly, I know from the 35th Street experience, it seemed like that whole group got together. I don't think there was any outliers. I mean, anybody that was standouts on that. So I think that really makes a lot of sense. To 70% seems reasonable.
Yes, one other thing going through the comments, I just wanted to bring to your attention. Our city attorney had raised the question is, should your permit be good for 1 year from the date of issuance? Or should it be good for the calendar year? And most of the proposals I looked at, as well as our city administrator's comments, indicate, let's have it be for a calendar year. So you have one slug of applications, so to speak. I mean, you know, honestly, if it's like a 3-block provision, you're not gonna have tremendous numbers of applications. It's gonna be workable. And if it happens in a particular, we can probably designate a time of year that we want the renewals to be and so forth to make it fit with city workload.
Tracy was next, then I can just see John's heads wheeling, so then Councilmember Gassover.
All right, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Bodie, for the draft ordinance. I think it's a long overdue thing that we need. The one concern I have about going back to the discussion of the 60% is the word lots. So one thing I don't know enough about my city, which I should, is how many absentee landlords there might be. So do we have any areas that are so rent heavy that we should probably be talking to the residents rather than to the owners?
That's a good question. City Attorney Pratt, that question, do you have any feedback on lots versus residents in the 70% calculation?
Lots is
I
easier
think it
to
is the
determine.
residents of the lots. Maybe it isn't the owners of the lots. I don't know.
I guess lots is easier to determine. We know there's one, you know. Residents, we'd have to do some digging to find out. And do you mean one?
Right,
What do you know?
right.
That's harder.
Yes. So, so Councilmember Foratani, I think then that could be an issue. But I guess we would, under this, we would stick with lots and we would deal with that issue if we had absentee owners. we deal with that as the time came. At least they're owners of record and they can be located, so hopefully.
Right, and is it on point, if is it okay if I finish my comment? Yeah, the concern that I have is, of course, the neighborhoods that are going to be most impacted are those that have multifamily housing, for instance. And since we're considering middle housing and all such, I'm concerned that we get the right people to vote on this, that is to say petition the city, right?
Yes. Do you have any thoughts on an alternative that would work? Or would you be comfortable going forward with this on an interim basis? And then if we find that we have experience and we need to modify it, we could?
That seems like a very
Does
good
that
plan.
seem okay?
That sounds like a great plan.
Okay.
Councilmember Cassover, then Councilmember.
Thank you. I'm thinking about practical details here, and really 70%, I'm really fine with that, but I also recognize that that's a pretty high bar. And somebody will have to do work to actually gather this, bring these names
Correct.
forward, gather the petition. And I don't know who that person, who that is. Is that somebody in the neighborhood? Is it, does the city have any responsibility or involvement here? And so could you
My
tell me your
sense is
thinking?
it's a neighborhood initiative. And so someone or a group of people in the neighborhood go door to door. You know, I think, like, I'm trying to think of a similar example. If you want to put underground wiring in your house, you have to have a certain number of people and you have to, you know, have agreement of what they want and how much it's going to cost. And I'm familiar with one situation where it was just that, a group of people got together and then they went door to door. And so that's what I would envision, that it would be neighborhood led, neighborhood implemented. The city's involvement would be when the petition or the letters come to the city. Obviously, it would be good for the community to let the city know ahead of time, and I'm sure that would happen in our city.
Okay, if I could just follow up a little bit. So we have different demographics around the city. And I am very aware that those who lead more privileged lifestyles would find a task like this relatively easy. But those who come from lower income and maybe not so stable resident, you know, long-term residents and things like that, this bar could be quite high. So I just, that's a caution that's in my mind, and I don't really know how to deal with it, but and as we think about issues of equity and inclusion, that concerns me a little bit.
So would you a question for you, Councilmember Cassover, would you go forward with 70% because of the consistency issue that Councilmember Goldman has raised? Or would you go ahead with 70 with some indication in the council record that, like the ownership issue that Councilmember Fortani raised, we would come back and look at that once there's been some implementation? It could be that that we won't have any petitions for a matter of years. So it could be some time before we face those kinds of issues. So that's a
Yes.
question for you.
Yes, I think that would be, as I said, I raise it as a caution rather than as, you know, an objection, if you see what I mean. It is something I think we'll have to watch and be careful about.
On point.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. This is a great discussion. You know, the 70% level, I don't think we should be stuck with that as sort of a standard. We don't really know the history of how that was created, and certainly the chief and the traffic calming group have some thoughts about that. I think what we need to do is figure out what is the best that we can do with the information that we have at hand, and thinking about exactly what you said, Councilmember Cassover, Vice Chair Cassover, that we need to be, you know, thinking very carefully that some areas may not have the ability to garner support for various things, and or may not feel comfortable doing it, which is another question. At the same time, I think that there is an opportunity here, just as comparing apples to cinder blocks, so to speak. With some of the ordinances we've had, including the tree ordinance, we've recognized that we're going to have to make adjustments as we go forward. But I agree with Councilmember Bodie too. There's an opportunity for us to put into the record the discussion of, is it 60 versus 70? bookmark that as well as figuring out a way to ensure that that we're not overburdening staff. I like the idea of the pull rather than the push. We're not trying to foist this on you. If you would like it, please, here's the process to go through. And it allows us to kind of meet it out when it comes to, you know, staff time and resources as well, because it's going to cost some money to do this. So.
Yes, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, a comment and then a question. So on the question about owners, so we've had, again, similar discussion about the Healthy Streets Ordinance, and I believe the plan was to bring that on the December 14th meeting for feedback. But we decided on homes rather than people, since it seemed to make more sense that, you know, should a child below driving age get be needed for this petition. And also, I think we were leaning toward, we didn't, I don't think discuss it explicitly, but it's the people living in there, not the people who own it. And in many cases, that'll be the same, but it's the people who live there that will be parking, or in the case of Healthy Streets, who will be walking along the street. And so whoever's living in the house would be the one that needed to sign the petition. And then my question is, well, actually, I have two questions. The first one is, what about, I guess, visitors not associated with a house, like a UPS truck or, you know, delivery truck, so that they need to be able to park, but there's really no way to give them a permit because they're going to be very intermittent.
Yes, there are exceptions for deliveries, and there are also temporary visitor permits. So suppose you have someone staying at your house for a week or something, or 2 weeks or a month, you could get a temporary visitor permit. So there are both sets of provisions if you go through here. I think there are exceptions for deliveries and drop-offs and things like that. And then there are provisions for temporary visitor permits. So if you see, it's service vehicles, childcare pickup, and disabled parking exemptions. Basically, those are exemptions.
Okay. And yeah, and the other one, and I am supportive of this. I'm just trying to kind of make sure that it works well. So thinking about practicalities of enforcement, is the expectation that residents of the street would basically call the city to say, this person's parked here and they don't have a permit? And I wonder, and maybe this is a question for the chief, that if it would be police who would be issuing tickets, what sort of bandwidth do they have? Or would this be somewhat toothless because the police were already stretched pretty thin?
We discussed that previously, and I think the consensus of the council at the time, if I recall, was that it was the kind of thing that there would be spot checks on. But it would not be, it would be, you know, not, obviously, if there was a time of high police priority or low police staffing, this would not be one of the highest priority issues. On the other hand, you're probably right that the citizens themselves might notice if someone has a permit or doesn't have a permit, especially if they's parked in the same place for a couple of days or more. So I imagine there'll be some of that, but I think the goal was not to make it unduly burdensome, but to try to send the message through you know, spot checks of a periodic nature. And in the beginning, if you recall in here, there's kind of warning signs and warnings before the program gets up and running in a full-fledged way.
Thanks.
Can I ask a question? There is something that's highlighted in this, and it is, how many, if you're a resident, how many permits should you be able to get? And this is under application for permits C on page 8 somewhere, 8.
Top of 8.
So I actually think the idea of 2, but you can get 2 additional, makes sense. So again, this is something that we could see over time, if that's sufficient. If there's a need for something more flexible, maybe we should say no more than 2 shall be issued, provided the department may issue. We could just say additional permits if an applicant demonstrates, rather than limit that the second group to 2, the optional group to 2. So again, I'd like some sense of the council on that. that, okay,
Councilmember Brito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yes, Councilmember Bodie, that sounds like a really great idea. The thing that I'd been thinking about was the same problem with the apartments, right?
yes,
When you have multiple families in there, though, I think it kind of dovetails with the discussions we've been having on whether to require off-street parking in a lot of these zones. And I'm thinking that the areas, at least that initially will do this, don't have that problem. So I'm okay with doing this provisionally.
yes, I am just not sure how much demand there'll be for this, but I do think it's helpful as we have the discussions going forward with the community that they know they have this option if a problem arises.
Yes. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and on point, I think the latter idea of saying if there's a demonstrated need, I think it makes a lot of sense. I would go back to the question of, residents versus owner. I know that I won't mention the specifics, but we have a household not very far from here that has at least 10 or 12 people living in it and about 10 or 12 vehicles that the neighbors are complaining about the vehicles being parked all over the place. And so if it's residents, then in theory, there has to be some sort of balance there, I think, too.
Yes.
But that's an extreme circumstance, and we can't allow, the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think there's an opportunity here to have it evolve.
I think it's like the tree ordinance in that respect, if you think about how many iterations that has been through over the years. So if we do have petitions and as we implement them, I'm sure there'll be refinements.
Yes.
Regarding the number, I would just tie it to, since they have to pay, if they have 3 vehicles and they need 3 permits, they can apply for 3 permits.
Yes.
The other is with regard to helping people through the process. It's about what we do. We can advertise that this is available to communities that want to do this and that we can provide support if they have questions.
Yes.
On point, actually, John, you raised an interesting question because people who register their cars within our community pay into our TBD and help pay for our streets as well. So there's some intersection there that we could probably sort out as well.
Councilmember Riddle, would you like to?
Yeah,
join in?
I'm catching up. My apologies. I had the time wrong in my calendar. So I think the one place that we were talking about here that I want to sort of confirm my agreement with John Lebo, if they have 3 cars registered to that address, they can get 3 permits. I think the place where I have some challenge is under the temporary visitor permits. I know we say is the responsibility of the resident to control the use of those permits. I just don't know how we're going to be able to say that that person's had that visitor permit for more than 7 days and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of extra detail in there that just doesn't necessarily help us at this point and just makes more busy work for neighbors to get angry with each other or call the police department or whatever. I think
To me, it's
if they
kind
have
of
a visitor permit and they have a visitor, then there they are.
To me, it's kind of a guideline because you just don't want people getting a visitor permit and parking there all the time. You know what I mean? In a way. So I think I understand that, the question of how would this be enforced is a question. These are similar provisions to what other ordinances have, and I don't know the answer to that question. But I assume, as usual, that it's more a matter that the neighbors will pay attention and, maybe it won't, I'm assuming it won't be that much of an issue, the visitor permit issue, so.
Yeah, and I think the visitor permit itself is fine. I think just trying to micromanage how it's being used might be a bit challenging and could lead to conflict.
So Councilmember Riddle, what are you thinking, like parking in excess of 7 days within any 30-day period? I see you say who's keeping track of this, and I don't think our police department is going to go around and monitor that.
Yeah.
So parking more than 1 block from the permitted residence, I would be fine deleting that one. I think as a guideline, parking in excess of 7 days within any 30-day period is a good one. but I understand what you're saying about enforcement. And you know, you're not supposed to use visit. I think the main thing is if there's a annual fee for your parking permit, you don't want people using a visitor permit to avoid having to pay the, you know, what is, if it's $50, let's say, for administrative costs.
Well, I think if we update C from 2 to just 1 permit per registered vehicle, then there really wouldn't be a need for them to use a visitor permit for the registered vehicle, I suppose.
Right,
So I mean, that might balance it out if they have that many
Yes.
vehicles. So yeah, so I think for me, I just feel like this could be, maybe if we get into much trouble, we can kind of grow into these sorts of challenges. I think simply the first paragraph says, you know, just for bona fide transient use for visitors. So
Okay.
obviously, if someone moves in and they're living there full time, they're no longer a visitor, they're a resident, and then they can apply for another.
so
permit.
for now, you would delete 1, 2, and 3.
I think so.
Okay.
It's just,
What do
think-
other council members think about that level of detail, recognizing the enforceability?
Councilmember Lebo.
I think it depends on whether or not you're paying the same price for a visitor's pass as opposed to an annual pass. And if the visitor's pass does not have the same cost, then a resident would simply use their visitor pass to park in front of their house. And so I would not be in favor in that regard of deleting 1 or 2.
Okay. You mean 3?
1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3. Okay.
2 I could strike.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. 2 could be stricken.
So I guess the answer is 1 and 3.
Yeah. Other council members?
I'll wait for myself.
I think you're up next. Or you were, go ahead.
Yeah, but I have a different topic.
Okay,
Different topic too.
go ahead. Okay. Anybody else on this topic?
Is there general acceptance of leaving in 1 and 3 and deleting 2? And then if, again, this is an issue we could flag as one of the ones we'll come back to if it becomes a problem. I had assumed that visitor permits would be cheaper than the main annual parking permit, so I think that's why some of these provisions are in there.
if I may follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go
Thank
ahead.
you. I think if they're, kind of to your point, if they cost the same, I don't think we're gonna have as many issues with the visitor permits.
Mhm.
And I think being at this beginning stage, being more trusting of our community to use it correctly rather than being more prescriptive. And then if we do have issues, we can always come back and add more sort of clarification. But because, you know, right now I just want to know, you know, my neighbors out there checking off my car every day to figure out if it's been 7 days when the last 30 days. I mean, no one's really going to do that.
Right.
So why have it in here? Is kind of my opinion.
I think because of long-term parking and use of visitor permits by residents for resident vehicles, because you're not gonna pay us the same for a visitor permit for that's temporary as you are for an annual permit. So, I mean, that's gonna be part of our fee schedule, so
I'm not saying don't challenge the visitor permit piece, but yeah,
yes.
yeah. I
So
think
would
just-
could you live then with just the deletion of 2? And perhaps parking in excess of, say, 10 days within a 30-day period?
I don't know who's gonna spend that much time paying that much attention. I just,
Okay.
sorry, so I
Yeah.
apologize, we're talking now.
Yeah.
Councilman's council. needs to say
Okay,
something.
so I don't know if any of you've had experience with actually being in neighborhoods where this happens. And I have, not here, but in London, actually, or around my parents' apartment. And what I will tell you is if parking is tight and residents find cars that should not be there with not proper permits there, they will do something about it because it really affects their lives.
Yes.
So I actually think that this will be quite a self-limiting, kind of, you know, monitoring situation. I think the residents themselves will take care of it. I don't think we need police to be going around and looking at the permits. The residents will report cars that are in the space they usually use because they don't belong there. So I don't worry about that. The one thing I am worried about, though, at the top of page 8, you have business in there, and I can't see that this ordinance works on a street where there is a business that has patrons.
I agree with you, and that's an artifact of the previous ordinances that it was drawn from, I think.
Okay.
So
well,
I'm fine striking.
Okay.
Or business.
Then-
I think that's
then
a
I'm
good,
fine.
that's a good question. And I forgot to mention that.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just while we're talking about artifacts, a couple of Scrivener's things. One, where are we here? On page 5, it jumps from B to E. So the lettering needs to be modified. The other thing I would recommend, so we're missing C and D, but that's minor. The other thing I'd recommend is we talk about lots. It should be tax parcel, because we
Okay.
have, wouldn't you agree, Ms. Pratt? Or should it, because lots there are some tax parcels that are multiple lots. I mean,
And
3 or
tax
4.
parcels change. The county can change tax parcels. I might have 2 lots but I want to be billed under 1 tax parcel. So
Okay.
I would actually use lots because that's what I assume will be
Okay,
mostly used as 1 home per lot.
okay, fair enough. Fair enough. That's a great clarification, because the county can change it. That does make sense. Thank you for that.
Hold on, Councilmember Riddle.
Could I just follow up a question,
Yeah.
City Attorney Pratt? Would it be possible to use the term household rather than lot?
You get into, we
Like
could look
it's-
into that. You get into things about what defines a household. We know we can't say, what's a family, what's a house, so I don't know that would,
Okay,
We talked about that. in
help
another
us. We could
context,
look.
remember?
Yes. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. I think in the model middle housing ordinance, they differentiate between like a lot and a unit lot, because you can have multiple units on a lot. And so if we're looking at having multiple housing situations on a lot, but I think we just have to look into this really carefully to make sure we're getting what we want, because if we have 2 independent undefinable households on one lot, because now we have the ability to have the ADU or whatnot, I just want us to be real careful about how we describe
Seattle,
that.
the Seattle attorney, our city attorney would like to speak.
You have defined dwelling unit. You might want to consider using dwelling units.
I
It's top of
would
page
support
7.
that.
Okay,
Yeah.
Well. That's a tough one.
And on point, if I may, we're going to have the middle housing bill that we're
Yeah.
working through right now from Commerce's, comment period. And this would change, but if we go with dwelling unit, that will change definitively, depending on what Commerce settles on after the comment period,
Mhm.
so. That's not set in stone.
yes.
New question? Oh, actually, I believe.
I also have a new question.
Well, he's been waiting a little bit.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So on page 7, where it says application for permits, I wonder if it would be better to have the permits tied to the house rather than to a car. And the reason I ask that is, let's say there's a house that the family has 2 cars and there's room for 1 in the driveway. So one's going to be on the street. But it might be a different car each day. So maybe it's whoever gets home from work first gets the garage and the other person gets the street. But with this approach, the permit is tied to one specific car.
I think that is the way it has to operate for administrative clarity. And I assume that no one's going to be checking license plate numbers, and people could pass off their permit to each other if they want it. But I don't think it's, I think because we're looking at registered cars at the address, I'm unsure whether that's not causing more problems than it solves. So it's a very good question. Again, the models I looked at used vehicles.
Yep.
I looked at, I think, this goes back a while. I think I looked at about 3 cities that had parking issues, including, I think one was in the vicinity of Wazoo.
Ah, yes.
Councilmember Riddle.
On that topic, I believe the Discover Pass and maybe the Parks Pass have spots to put down 2 license plates.
Yep.
So that you can move them between a couple cars. So there are some options out there. I think if we go with something like stickers, then that becomes obviously not possible. So what I wanted to bring up, and thank you for bringing up businesses too, because that was another on mine. I don't know if it's come up yet, but is the Public Works the right place for us to manage this? And I don't know if you've had conversations with staff. I don't know if Public Works takes applications and does review process.
Yes, you
Did
were.
that come out
you missed-
earlier?
yes.
Perfect.
And I think there was consensus to say the community development director.
Thank you.
So,
I'm glad that came up.
yes,
Yeah, and then I think the only other place is council involvement. Did we talk about council involvement and approval yet?
no,
No. I'm curious if we need to be involved in that process, because I don't think we approve many other things that relate to the community other than, appointments by the mayor. It just feels like an interesting place to insert this council with the way that we kind of have our current policies and procedures.
that was one of our city attorney's questions, and one I thought would be good. So thank you for raising that. I didn't include it in my list of questions, but I honestly am on the fence about that too. That was a model again in a number of places. I think because of probably the sensitivity of these issues, if it got denied by the community development director, it doesn't go to the hearing examiner or anything, but who could, listen at
Mhm.
least. So it
Yeah.
was, I think, of a community engagement opportunity more than a legalistic thing, in case it was denied. So, that is the plus, and the minus is it's not at all the kind of thing that the
Mhm.
council usually gets involved with. So I think the question is, should we, city attorney Pratt raised it, should we delete that provision and it's just final decision rests with the community development director?
Yeah, and I think if they don't like it, we will hear about it. So.
Other
just-
council members, leave it in, take it out. Flip a coin.
Yeah, again, similarity with the Healthy Streets Ordinance, the most recent version has removed council's role in deciding whether something should be converted to a healthy street or not. So if we're leaving that in the hands of staff, I would propose for parking, we leave that in staff hands as well.
I think that's a very good consistency point. So, okay, very good.
And
Yes, keep going.
we got one over there that came first.
Yes.
Thanks. And so I guess moving the discussion forward to next steps, then, is there going to be another companion legislation to set the fee, actually?
I assume that we would include that in our fee schedule, which we set separately. So our annual fee schedule, and that gives us time to mull and think about it. I was thinking the annual fee would be somewhere in the range of $50 to $75, something reasonable that doesn't make it prohibitive at all, but that defrays some of the costs of implementation in at least a modest sense. And then if it becomes more costly and problematic, we could raise the fee. So,
Sure. I noticed that Seattle's is 95, so.
yes, so I think as long as you stay under 100, you're good. So that had been my expectation.
On point, if I may. So does anyone know, does Seattle have a base? Do you receive a parking permit based upon only if you apply for it and pay the fee? Or is it you have a foundational parking permit because you have a home or you're a resident?
At one point then, according to their site, it seems like you have to apply for it.
Okay,
Yes.
Okay. And to make it even more complicated, they have tiered fees in certain neighborhoods and a flat fee in other neighborhoods. So your guest permit might cost the same as your initial permit, or it might cost the same as your third permit. So, yeah.
Yes.
If I could channel a little of Councilmember Lebo, it would be nice if we knew how much effort and staff time went into these and tailored the fee to cover our staff time. So we may not know that for sure going into it, but I think this would be one of those programs we would like it to be self-sufficient and not be impactful. And I'm seeing a nod over there so from the city administrator. And then also on that point, I think applications for permits, I don't think we typically get into this level of detail as what's on the application. We typically provide the policy and then the application is developed by the administration. So I don't know if we need to go into that level in our policy making. I don't think we typically do that either.
I actually think it's helpful because it takes some burden off of staff and creates less controversy. If citizens object to some of these points being on the application. So most of the ordinances I looked at had at least the common elements of what should be in an application. Again, we were following other models here.
Councilmember Lebo, I think you were next.
Thank you. And when I lived in Seattle, I lived in one of the areas that had an art or residential zone for parking, and it's based upon you apply for it. And part of the rationale was if you don't have any cars, you don't need it. So why should you have to pay into it? The other is that when we set the fee schedule, we should think in terms of disabilities and hardship.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. I think initially let's say you have 30 residences, dwelling units, lots. And you have, let's say, 50 applicants. And you set the time of year when that's going to occur. That's why it makes sense to you. I think you missed the conversation about having it be a set calendar year date. We might not want it to be December, right? Because of the workload, but maybe it's February to February. We can talk to staff about that, but I think the concept is it would be a slug for, a short period of time.
Yes.
Would we be interested in prorating for the remainder period, or is that too much detail to
Too
talk
much
about today?
detail right now. Yeah, we'd figure that out.
Yeah.
Move on. Yeah, it's all okay.
So I think the question is, these are good revisions. I'd like to work with the city attorney and I guess the city administrator too, because there's some, city staffing issues involved in making these changes, and come up with a revised draft for us to consider. And the question is, would we be ready? Because to me, we do not have a multitude of changes here, changes in the fundamentals. So I would be comfortable trying to move to the next step of, and we have to have a public hearing, is that correct, to adopt it? Is that correct?
No, I don't
No,
think so.
okay.
Not a
'Cause it's
land.
not a
use
land use thing.
regulation.
Okay. So, the question is, what would, the next step, obviously, this is a busy time of year. So to make the changes, even though there aren't a lot of them, it's a busy time of year. So, I guess I'd be interested to hear from, the mayor and deputy mayor on timing here.
Oh, I'm out.
I was giving you a chance.
I know, but you don't open the door.
And our vice chair. Who's about to leave too.
Having been through, these kinds of changes before, one of the problems that you will find if you try to push this into January for final adoption is that you have to go through all of this all over again with your new council members. So if there is any way to get it done and on the agenda for the 14th, I think that's your most efficient move.
So let me see if that's possible, to see if we could have it ready. We can make sure that the draft goes out ahead of time and so that we can make sure everyone has an opportunity if there are some amendments that come forward before adoption. We could try to plan for adoption at the next meeting.
Just on
Or
point.
is
from
it, but by the 14th, correct?
Yeah, scheduling
Yeah.
wise, the 14th is a very loaded meeting. There's a lot going on. So, I mean, I think we can certainly find ways to make it happen. And I appreciate the idea of if we could get the revisions done quickly to get out, get them out to council so that there could be a review. And if there are concerns, they could be sent back to Ms. Pratt in terms of,
Yes.
the legal questions.
Yes.
I think this is the kind of topic that the community is going to be really interested in understanding, and I feel like trying to get it done before we break for Christmas, not a lot of people are going to know about this. I think they're going to feel a little bit like they weren't brought into this process. And I know that there's going to be some differences in the council next year. I don't see this as a divisive topic that would be somehow approached differently, but I could be wrong. But thinking about our community and those that are affected by this, they're not going to have a lot of time to review it and understand it. And I wouldn't recommend us trying to get this done that quickly from that perspective. Many of them are already gone on vacation.
Okay. Fair time, Councilor Fair time.
Thank you. And to that objection, I've been thinking about that too. And I'm thinking that there's also that sort of built-in fail-safe of the 60 to 70%
Yeah.
of the people who need to actually do it.
It's full.
So
Yeah.
presumably at that point, that neighborhood is informed about how this process works. And at that point, objections can be raised. So we're just providing a runway here. We're not really making anybody do anything here, right? So I don't really have a problem with approving this at the next meeting.
And if I could respond to my colleague, in no way was I anticipating that this would be a divisive or controversial topic, but just
Education.
simply that if you're asking new council members to take a vote, they need to understand what they are voting on. So you will have to go through quite a lengthy educational process so that their questions get answered and they fully understand and are ready to vote.
Yeah.
That was all I was indicating.
This is our first night seeing this, so I
Mhm.
think we can get them up to date.
We've talked about.
We've
We talked about it in general, yeah.
No, we have the
No.
drafts.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
got
Previously.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is the
first
edited
time,
draft.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would err on the side. I appreciate Mr. Furtani's comment. I really do believe this would be very different if we were saying, this is what you get. This is just another vehicle, pun intended, for people to do something. If they want to, they can ask for it. We're not foisting it on them.
But I add one more factor, please. As the lakefront park issues go forward and the issue of parking comes up, there's going to be a workshop as soon as January to look at preliminary designs and alternatives. And so I think it would be helpful for us with the community actually to be able to say, we have adopted this process that is available in case there are problems on Beach Drive or wherever it may be, Brookside Boulevard or wherever. So from that point of view, the timing would be helpful, I think, for us to just be able to point to.
Anything else?
Thank you very much. I'll try to work on edits with the city administrator and city attorney and try to have a draft in advance of the December 14th meeting, so we can hopefully take it up at the December 14th meeting. And consider any further amendments, hopefully none at that time.
Okay, anything else? Okay, I'm gonna actually do you guys a big favor. After I get back on my feet after my surgery, I will volunteer for a small stipend to be your parking czar.
We may take you up on
I
that.
request a Prius and one of those long sticks with a piece of chalk on it, and
Yeah.
I'll drive around and.
Three-wheel Cushman.
And a fluorescent vest. We'll
You
get
betcha,
to it.
I'm all in. I'd be a good job for me after that. And number two, I'm gonna suggest something kind of irritated me. I really think people who are running for council, especially after elected, should be coming to meetings so they know what's going on. So because we all know what it's like in your first meeting, you have no clue what's going on.
Mhm.
It'd be nice to kind of have an idea, because this is one of those examples that things moving forward have been nice for him to be sitting there to hear exactly what you guys are thinking about in the future, so. On to that, Tom, it's your topic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bringing back to council for discussion, the implementation of the racing ordinance. You may recall, we started this discussion a year ago, June, relative to the revised, excuse me, RCWs that allowed for various provisions. Well, first it started with the racing ordinance, the no racing ordinance, or RCW included several clauses that gave the PD additional teeth for recidivism when it came to excessive speeds, including as a last resort seizure of a vehicle. But it's happened in considerable numbers down in Kent and some other cities to the south, as I understand it. Additionally, we just passed the additional required change to our code to allow for traffic cameras to be put in no race zones, which was there, as you recall, there are park zones, school walk zones, hospital zones, and no race zones. We do not have a hospital zone. And again, I'll make the distinction between a school walk zone and a school zone. They're different. In our community, a school walk zone is actually a very, very large area, almost 2/3 of our community when you're talking about Brookside and Lake Forest Park Elementary. But this comes, the legal team brought this back with the removal of, excuse me, there's many of the ordinances around our community, around our neighboring communities, including Shoreline, have something called SOAR, which is a stay out of racing. Stay out. I don't know where it's SOAR. Anyway, basically stay out of racing zone. And we do not have any issues with attendance at race events. Knock on wood, hopefully we never do. But that particular provision, I thought, was considerably onerous, and it's really not necessary for our community. It's a situation where you've got a large group of people that are attending an event, and allows the PD to issue citations for people who are attending that area, that event. And what this does is gives the PD additional opportunities to, one, if there's recidivism with somebody who's speeding excessively through the community on an exhibition basis, whether it's one person timing themselves or two people racing against each other, gives them an additional tool, and as well as gives us an additional tool in terms of traffic safety camera installations. I will note that there aren't specific roads that have been listed here. You may recall that at a previous meeting, I gave you a list of the roads that Shoreline had included in their ordinance, which included Aurora, 15th. Oh gosh, I can go down through 145th. I mean, pretty much any arterial or major road within Shoreline. The road that goes Richmond Beach Road, which has been apparently very challenging for Shoreline PD. They've had lots of issues there. And at a subsequent meeting, I will bring back in consultation with the PD some recommendations about some roads that I think would make some sense, including Perkins, which we do see issues with that as well. This is really just sort of tying off some of the appropriate changes that we need to put this into effect. And I wanted to get it back to into your hands for a quick look before we bring it back in final form, including some specific roads like 522, 104, 178th, and potentially 35th if there seems to be a necessity for that. With that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Could you repeat those locations, please?
522, 104, and again, this is off the cuff, 104, 178, and 35th.
Okay.
There was a question about whether 197th, 55th, I think Mr. Furtani had asked about that. I think we need to consider that as well, because some of the residents, including a young member of our community, had indicated there were some challenges on that road as well from people racing.
Yes. Councilmember.
I would offer up Perkins as well, as someone who lives up
You just said.
listening value. I can
said-
hear them.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The
But that
second time
was-
I didn't say
yeah,
Perkins. Yeah,
thank you.
you're absolutely right.
Just wanna
Yeah,
make sure.
Perkins is definitely one
One
that
of-
perennially it's been an issue. But again, this is the, let's call this the foundational ordinance. And then if there are changes that you would like to see affected in here, please let me know. And we'll bring back the specific places that are required under the RCWs to be delineated.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilman French, Chair French, for coming up with this ordinance. I think it's long overdue. I think we hear a lot from our community about racing on our streets, and you know, there's not a night that doesn't go by where if you're living anywhere in the ravines, you hear this. So my point is that you made this earlier point about the SOAR zones that other communities have, and what I'm wondering about is that we're still defining spectating in this ordinance, correct? But spectating isn't the same as defining a SOAR zone, just to be clear.
I think you're correct. And again, it seemed as though the SOAR zones, there are orders that can be issued if somebody has attended multiple race events. And that's what the SOAR zone. So even if the person is not a racer, if they're attending and filming it, for example, for YouTube or whatever they're doing, Instagram or Snapchat or whatever they're doing, then the PD would have the option to say, you may not be in this area and doing any kind of activity that is conducive to bad behavior. But I didn't think that was necessary. I thought that was too complicated, but I'm certainly happy to listen to contrary or alternative opinions.
But on point, you can still be cited according to this ordinance for being there.
Attending, exactly.
Right, okay.
That's right.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, thank you. I would just want our police department to have the opportunity if there is racing in the street. Let's say you have a son who's a high school student and he and his buddy are racing. I would want the police department to have an opportunity, as they always do, to give a warning first, depending on the situation, you know, as opposed to like a big formal street racing event, right? So to me, I draw a distinction. They're both bad. They both should be covered by this. But I think about, you know, some of the situations I've heard about where there's been racing by high school students that have resulted in accidents, you know, that kind of thing. So the second thing is, I think that the impoundment of a vehicle for up to 30 calendar days should not occur with a first conviction. I think that's a little severe for a first conviction. And I'm wondering, is this something that other jurisdictions have for even a first conviction?
I believe, does it say first in here?
It doesn't. It
no.
just says, in addition to the penalties upon conviction, the
So,
court may impound the
Ms.
vehicle.
Pratt, if I'm not mistaken, the RCWs are pretty specific that it has to be a situation of a second or I believe it's a second for impounding. The authority to impound is, I believe it's 2 or more infractions, but I may be
That would be
mistaken.
helpful to know. Yeah.
I think you should put them in jail on the first one and they'll learn their lesson. And then when they kill somebody in the second, it wouldn't happen because they learned their lesson on the
I
first.
do understand that. I
I-
just think that it could be harsh,
I would like you to take about 10 of my kids' cars away right now. if I could
especially
do
if
that.
someone needs their car to get to work. The first
Well,
time
point
the
well
warning.
taken. I think too, and without telling tales out of school, we have had an incident that I believe is illustrative of the thoughtfulness of the PD when it comes to younger people.
Yes,
And so
That is-
maybe that's what you're referring to.
that
So-
is my concern, is that I know our PD is thought, I wouldn't want them to feel it's mandatory if we have
Of
2
course.
of our younger people speeding dangerously, even though that's terrible and they should be given severe warning. But I know our police department is, you know, community oriented and so forth, and we don't want to wreck a young person's life with a criminal
Sure, of
conviction.
course.
Second thing is on spectators, I'm just, I'm a little nervous with citing spectators. And I'm asking the question, is that something that is in other ordinances? Yes?
Yes.
It is the, saying Kent,
Uh-huh.
they can get very large crowds at a racing
Okay.
event.
Shoreline as
So
well.
it's really meant for those
Yeah,
kind of.
for those
things.
kind of situations.
Yes.
Okay, with that understanding, I'm okay. It's just, what if you happen to be walking down the street and someone, has decided to have a race? But I understand, like, when it's a really organized event and people are coming, I've seen Fast and Furious.
Thank you, Councilmember, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, I don't think that. I really believe that we've all tried very hard to make sure that any kind of thing when it involves enforcement on our roads, et cetera, is not something that's going to buttonhole the PD.
Yes.
It's going to give the PD additional
Discretion.
tools, discretion, and the courts as well to make sure that we're not, pushing people into something that's.
Yes, that's really what I'm getting at, is the gray zone of discretion. So thank you.
Thank
I
you.
think that answers my questions.
Anybody else? Okay.
Thanks, everybody. We'll.
The RCW says that a violation of the racing statute is the same, you get the same penalty as reckless driving, which is gross misdemeanor. And it doesn't, I do not see where it says.
You can seize a car.
No, I'm not seeing, I mean, that's the first time.
The first time. Okay, I apologize. I thought I saw that in the RCW, but I'll revisit my notes and make sure I'm not mistaken about that. So,
Yes, Councilmember.
Yeah, I think this as written doesn't create an issue with the PD. They know what they're doing. They're gonna enforce the law. The courts are there to sort of with the discretion of how to apply punishment, restitution, and so forth. So I think because we say shall and can, I think we're fine. I think our system here will work just fine with this. And if it's somebody's first offense, I think that that's going to be taken into consideration. And I think there's so many pieces to someone getting caught in this that we don't understand and varies. I think we leave it up to the PD to determine if they believe a law was broken, and then the courts to determine what should happen therefore. So I'm happy not putting myself in the middle of that with this. And I think it's written that way right now, so.
Okay, everybody okay?
Mhm.
Moving on,
thank you.
Matt. We're gonna hear about options for receiving citizens' comments at public meetings. I watched you guys' meeting. That was entertaining. As soon to be former mayor, I say, just shut it down and not have it anymore unless you sign up and get a written welcome from our mayor to join the meeting.
Notarized.
Yeah,
He'll personally come over and interview you to make sure you're worthy of Zooming.
that was, I think we're all still needing therapy after that meeting.
Yes, we're here to discuss options. In your packet, I've listed out 4 options. Unfortunately, you are required to have public comment at a regular council meeting. You could limit it to just items on the agenda. We could require people to sign up online before the meeting. So if they're not signed up, I could actually just not, even if they raise their hand during a meeting, I could kick them out before they even talked. And the other option would be to verify everybody. That's kind of problematic because depending on the time frame of when I cut the sign up part over, it's hard to verify that many people that sign up to speak. So really, I'm just here to kind of take questions about what options, if you want a combination of options, we can do that. Or we can just leave it the same and play it by ear.
Please no.
Councilmember Castlever, and then Councilmember Levy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And as my colleagues know, I did a bit of research on this and have read quite a bit of because it's happening across the country. It's not just us. I just thank you very much, Matt, for having, or City Clerk, for having put this together, because this is exactly, I think, what we needed to understand what our options are. So I just will run through the options a little quickly to say what I think about them. The in-person only public comment limit is you know, an idea that I think it is worthy of some thought, but it's not my favorite. I don't think that requiring people to sign up before the meeting would have stopped what we experienced. I don't think verifying the speakers is really a practical option. So actually that leaves me with number 3. And the question I have for you is, I like the idea of limiting public comment to items on the agenda and or items the council has purview over. And I wondered, City Clerk, whether you had any input on whether that is in fact an allowable legal option for us to limit it to those kinds of topics.
The legal option, I'd have to pass over to our city attorney. I've raised that question too.
I think you could say items council has purview order. I think we all experienced this a few weeks ago. It will stop them at some point, but I think we saw they are getting quite good at this. They even asked Councilmember French, do you have a germane rule? So they're gonna, but it would stop them at a point where it is obviously not something council has purview over.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
There's a lot here. I want to start by saying a big thanks to Matt that evening. I know that was incredibly stressful, Matt, and all of us that were here in the chambers and including a couple of folks who were, one individual who was not on staff, but here doing the business of the city, we were all terribly upset about it. It was deeply, deeply disturbing. I also want to say thank you to the legal team and to Matt and the administration for figuring out a way that didn't get propagated out there. What occurred? People can ask for the transcript, but the world is unfortunately, there are some hateful people and they've chosen to take advantage of the public good and an open public process. And while my initial reaction after that meeting was to say, yeah, no public comment online at all, I heard loud and clear from from Councilmember Goldman, particularly, who said, wait, there are people that may not be able to attend the meeting. And I agree with that. That is very important. It limits inclusion and equity and accessibility. And so as much as I feel that all 4 of these are imperfect, I am definitively leaning towards number 3, just because of the fact that I think we have to make sure that we are, as much as what was said makes our blood boil, the Constitution is the Constitution, and we do have to recognize free speech. And we do not want the hateful, awful people to win. And if we shut down public comment online, they're winning because they're going to exclude people that are unable to attend council meetings, who are unable to, for a variety of reasons. And I think that's unfortunately, as public servants, that's something we just have to live with.
Okay,
that's my 2 cents.
if they have to declare what they're gonna speak and they stop talking about what they're asking the question, can we shut them off?
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Make sure they just tell them they have to declare
Yeah,
what they're gonna say, and you just have the button. As soon as they go off topic, you shut them down.
that actually happened in Kenmore.
Yep.
They were actually Zoom bombing their public hearing, so they would start off talking about some random comment about trees. And then they would start into the
Just gotta be able to
rants.
shut them off.
Yeah,
But in real honesty, guys, really, we probably had 8 people over the last 2.5 years actually make public comment online, so
Yeah.
that's just something, to think of. I know I'm out of here, so go ahead.
So I am familiar with other boards and have seen public comment and on 2 different boards. In fact, the hateful speech came from persons that were present, not online. And for the reasons that have already been expressed, I am also supportive of number 3. And the way I've seen that function is that when the opportunity for public comment arises, it is announced that the public comment should be limited to the topics and or germane to the purview of the council. And that as soon as a person goes off track, they are muted and they're requested to leave or stop depending upon the circumstances. So that has been a way to better control what's occurring. And again, in my experiences, in other venues, the hateful speech came from those that were actually present, not online.
Yeah. Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. I looked at a couple of MRSC documents about this, and there's some language that they have shared in their publications that are quotes from rulings that kind of say, okay, this is kind of what's gone through the court. And so I think that there's some language we can certainly pull from that's already gone through the vetting process. One of the pieces was about being, it shall be unlawful for any person in the audience, the council, engaged in disorderly, disruptive, disturbing, delaying. So they kind of were able to sort of give this description. And apparently that was an okay thing to do. I think requiring the topic, and then that gives us that sort of last ditch effort of like, you're off topic and we can just shut it down. I think we have to be careful, because if it's not disruptive, do we let them go off topic? And then are we being unevenly applying ourselves? But I think we can find the way to find a right place to do that. I want to keep online comments. I think they're infrequently used, but I think it's very useful. I would say that it might be useful to kind of close new people who could come into, the online attendee list, so that we don't have people leaving and trying to come back in and getting a second bite at the apple. So like
Right.
at the moment, because we had some people trying that the other day too, they would leave and come back with a new name. We kind of figured it was them. So I think when we open comment period, then that's the group that has the opportunity. It's just like if you come to council after public comment happens, you don't get a chance to step up to the podium. So I think we can find some ways to do this. I want us to be able as open and to comment as possible. 3 is the closest one. I think that gets where we want to go. And I think some additional language like from MRSC and the germane and the comment topic. I think those few things will help us be empowered to control what's going on in this council and make sure that it's staying on topic and positive for our community.
Yes, Councilmember Fairtime.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Riddle, for that comment about the people who are trying to up, as it were, onto the sign-up sheet. I think that language is very important. So whether we do it through ordinance or just through procedure, I think that's an important thing to add. And I'm in favor of the 3rd one as well, just because want to go with the lightest touch possible. Don't want to prevent basically anybody from speaking who has something on their mind. And my test is always, remember that fella who basically would talk about circuses?
He was awesome.
He was great. And I love his comments, and he kept it on topic by talking about recreational opportunities for youth. And so the point is that we want to encourage people like that to speak. So the point being that we need something that doesn't preclude that kind of speech.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm also in support of option 3. It was a hurtful meeting 3 weeks ago, but don't feed the trolls. that they want to cause chaos. They want us to overreact, to get angry, to do something that either lets them sue us or would cause us to overreact. So I think option 3 maintains the ability of people who have legitimate feedback for the city to provide that feedback. So yeah, I'm supportive of option 3.
Yes, Councilmember Bodie.
I also support option 3. I do like Councilmember Lebo's suggestion that we perhaps add to our standard agenda, that this would be public comment on items listed on the agenda or items the council has purview over. I think that would be a good addition to our generic information that we have for every meeting.
Yes, Councilmember.
So one way I've seen that handled is that not only is it written, but the announcement of public comments, there are ground rules. So the 3 minutes and so it's clear that what the expectations are.
That's great.
One just quick thing on point, I forgot to mention, I wasn't able to attend, but Ann McFarland actually did a through SCA yesterday. I don't know, did anyone attend that? Okay, great. The materials were sent out, but she did what was it? Arguments, insults, and interruptions, help for council meetings gone haywire. I was unable to attend, but one of us can send out the supplementary materials from that, the slides, et cetera. And, Ann McFarland is so fantastic. And maybe as we think about doing our Jurassic Parliament training with next January, we maybe be able to ask Ann to do a little vignette on that as well. I think it would be very helpful and maybe somehow therapeutic, right, Matt?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, anybody, you good? Everything's okay? Not to make you guys worry, but I am public comment 30 days from now, so. I'll ask him all the rules, so I know how to play the game, so. Yes. Yes.
I just wanted to second Councilmember Leo's comment of putting the ground rules at the beginning. I think just being consistent about that. And maybe also mentioning that this isn't actually a time for discussion so that folks are more understanding if they bring a very personal or hurt, something that's important to them and we can't speak back. Just, I think the laying out the ground rules is really appreciative. I would support that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Anything else?
That's what I'll do going forward. I'll update the agenda template to reflect the new rules and outline as
We
much
don't
as I
need to
can.
take any action beyond the
No.
nods. Okay,
No.
wonderful.
Okay, anything else for the good? Yes.
Just one comment. I was actually trying to find my copy of the governance manual here. But I think public comment is in the governance manual, so you might
Yes.
want to look at that and, just,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think we do have a place to bring this into our governance manual. Not just public comment, but just decorum in general, and many bodies have that, so I think we could look into that. Rarely needed, but it's nice to be there if we need it.
Yes, Deputy Mayor.
I was just going to remind everybody that we can't discuss topics that are not on the agenda. It's
Okay.
a special meeting.
Okay, you're all set? We'll adjourn. Thank you, council.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everybody. You actually. That was horrible. Gosh. It's just.